Welcome to JonGetsGames. This is my variety vlog covering March 2017. It's a bit later than I normally like to do these due to a power outage last week, which kind of threw everything into a mess, but as always, I'll be covering a bunch of different topics, so feel free to skip ahead to the part that most interests you, or stick around for the whole thing. First up, we have some general updates for the channel, and I'll begin with a very brief Patreon update. 6 new pledges were added to the campaign over this last month, which is a little bit slower than usual, but still really great to see that support coming in. I really appreciate it. So now let's move into something that has a somewhat significant effect on the usability of my channel, and that is that YouTube has announced that as of May 2nd, they will be discontinuing the annotations feature in videos. Now, these are the buttons that are on the screen that you can click, like that one right over there that lets you go forward to the next timestamp that I put into the video. And YouTube says the reason they're doing this is because over 60% of people watching YouTube are doing so on mobile platforms and various other things that don't allow for clicking, that people don't see those buttons anyway. I can see from my own statistics that they are used quite a bit. About 50% of the people who watch my videos do so on computers where they can click the buttons. And over the lifetime of the channel, which is pretty much almost exactly 3 years, over 135,000 annotations have been clicked. And that is just a lot of usability and help for people to get through my videos to watch the part that they want to see, because I know that not everybody wants to see every single second of these videos I put out. I intentionally put lots of different stuff in them so that hopefully people can pick and choose the stuff they want to do, and I don't waste their time with the stuff that they don't really want. And unfortunately, this feature is going away. Now, they are going to be keeping the annotations in all of their previous videos, so this one right here, you could still click that button even if it's hypothetically a couple of years in the future, but this is the last variety vlog that will have that. So next month when it rolls around and you see that nice big table of different stuff that you can jump to, you're going to have to actually look at the number and scrub along the bottom and get to that specific point, which is not that difficult. I'm still going to be putting in all of the timestamps into the videos, so like there'll still be stuff in that corner that you can see how to get to the next spot. But I liked having the ability for people just to have this interactive experience where you just click through and jump to the spot that you really like. It was a nice addition, and they say that they're replacing this with cards, which are another little symbol that shows up in that corner. It's a little eye, a little circle, but the functionality currently on cards is very lackluster compared to annotations, in my opinion, because all they let you do is go forward to a new video. You can't even specify a timestamp to jump to, and you certainly can't jump to a timestamp within one given video. And then a huge part about this is that you can't put information in there, just like a little bit of a corrective text for like the playthroughs I do. I try to, when I edit them, catch as many rules mistakes as I can. In fact, I oftentimes send them to the designers of the games before I publish them, and they come back and I put even more edits in there before I render it. But stuff can elude me and the designers, and it's a bit of a problem not being able to easily put a window up on the screen that 50% of the people who watch it will be able to see and notice that, you know, I made a mistake and here's the actual correction for it. I'll probably start putting these corrections in the description underneath the videos, but I know that very few people actually go there to look at those, which is certainly a problem. So I'm going to figure this stuff out, and I'm really hoping that with the annotations going away, YouTube brings in some new functionality to those cards. Like, I'd be okay with a little card in the top if it could blow up into a little word bubble that says, by the way, he skipped that player's turn, or something like that. Being able to add in that information is very important for informative videos like mine. But I'm not terribly confident. At the end of the day, we'll see how it all pans out, but it looks like it's very likely that everybody is just going to have to be scrubbing forward to the exact timestamps that they want in the future and not having a clickable interface for it. Lastly, this was a pretty big month for my little studio downstairs in several different subtle ways. Now, I film almost all of my videos down there, well, all of them except for these once a month variety vlogs, which I do upstairs in front of my big wall of games, so you can see how it all changes over time. And down there in the studio, I finally got a backdrop situation going, so that I have a black backdrop that's actually thumbtacked to the wall behind me, and then I got a curtain rod and put that in the ceiling, or I guess a little track, that I can now pull in a gray curtain, so I have gray and black as 2 options. And I actually have a couple more little tracks above me, so if I wanted to add a different color, that would not be that difficult for me to just slap it into the ceiling. And a big part of doing this was well, 1, to get away from the white wall, and 2 was to try and differentiate between the new Portal Games Spotlight videos that I'm doing for their channel, which are not JonGetsGames videos at all, and the ones I do on this channel. So I think having a big black background versus a gray one is going to help differentiate the 2 products, because, you know, this is me, this is my opinion, and all the things that I like, and that one is essentially marketing material, and so I want there to be a nice, distinct line between the 2. Now, once I got a big black backdrop, the problem is that I have dark hair, and suddenly my hair just kind of disappeared into the backdrop. So now I had to look into how to fix that, and it turns out there's these things called key lights or hair lights, which you hang on the ceiling and they shine straight down and they illuminate the hair on top of your head so that it pops more in the foreground when you're in front of a dark background. So I ended up buying one of those and installing that in the ceiling, and when I went through all this process, I ended up having to move my table over and jury rig a whole bunch of stuff, and I've essentially locked in a lot of things, put markers on the floor so that I can be much more repeatable with the way I make the videos to try and streamline the process of transitioning between the different types of videos I'm doing, because I have one camera. So if it's a table down shot or a looking straight at me shot, I'm trying to make it as quick as possible to jump back and forth between these, so I have more time for the making of the content and less time of just supporting it. So yeah, the backdrop and the hair light, like, there's subtle changes to the overall studio, but it actually culminated in quite a few dollars and quite many hours of work. So I'm quite happy to have the studio a little bit fleshed out, and it feels just a little bit more professional and real to me now that I've added these different things in there. And it's just one way that I'm trying to slowly iterate the overall quality of the channel, and I hope it is getting better over time. Let's now move into your opinion. And last month I asked how your opinion changed when you knew that content was free versus now being paid. And this was timely, of course, because last month is when I announced that I'm starting to be paid to make some of the videos for my channel. In fact, some videos for not my channel. And the overwhelming feedback was very positive. People seem to understand what I'm trying to do here, that it's that, I'm trying to be self-supportive, and I don't really know where this is going, but I think this is a good direction, and I spend so much time making these things that it makes sense that that time be actually paid for in certain circumstances when I can swing it. There was one or two people who did not take it very well, one person in particular, but I guess that is just how the internet goes. You can't please everybody, and I'm happy that most people are happy for the changes that are happening to the channel and for the growth and the prospects for the future that these kind of things can unlock for me and the channel. One interesting repercussion of this announcement was that the Patreon, many people pulled back on the Patreon campaign. There were several people who canceled their pledges, and there were also a few people who reduced their pledge amounts. And I completely understand this, because the idea of Patreon was to help support me doing this when I had no other support at all. And now that I am more self-supporting by actually being paid to do some of the stuff I'm doing, it makes complete sense that some people want to maybe give those dollars to somebody else who is still not able to self-support themselves, and get those people going. So I continue to really appreciate all the support that I'm having through Patreon, and I plan to keep it going for the foreseeable future. But I, again, completely understand when people want to back out and rearrange their priorities with the money that they have to support creators once creators are actually able to stand up on their own. When it comes to a new question for this segment, I honestly can't come up with anything good, and I'm not going to force it if I can't come up with a good question. So no question this month. Feel free to comment on anything I've said so far already, in particular the whole annotations thing and how that might have effects on the channel. But yeah, no official question this month, and maybe I'll come up with something good for the next one. Let's now move into questions and answers, and I have 3 questions I'll be covering this month. The first one comes from Talal, and they ask, do you always have munchies on offer when you are playing games? If yes, what kind of food do you have? And I don't always have munchies on offer. Usually what I do when I have game nights at my house is I say, come over, bring some games, and bring some snacks or drinks if you want to. And people oftentimes do, and we have a nice counter through the middle of our apartment that kind of divides the kitchen from the living room, and that's usually where people put all the munchies, and it kind of depends on who comes. There's somebody who comes who oftentimes brings cheese. There's somebody who comes who oftentimes brings beer. I'm not a very picky person, honestly, and so chips and salsa and all those kind of things do happen. Cheez-Its are a huge hit as far as I'm concerned. They don't happen all that often, but I have problems, compulsion problems when it comes to Cheez-Its. I just kind of keep eating them until my mouth feels like a big wad of salt. But anyway, so I obviously like those, but probably my favorite munchie when I'm playing games is beer. I know that's not munchie, that's a drink, but I just really enjoy drinking beers while I'm sitting down playing games with my friends. Obviously, I never get even slightly intoxicated. I just enjoy beer. And I don't really mind having food and beverage out on the table. I've had very few incidences with damage to games with something getting knocked over. I think Bonanza and Stone Age have both been whined over the last few years, but in general, it's not too bad. So yeah, I like having munchies out, but they are rarely on the table, I will admit. Like, we have that nice counter that supports everything. I think that's probably the best way to do it, so that when you're in a game, maybe you have a drink, but you don't have something you're actively snacking on the whole time because it's getting your fingers all grubby. But then when you're between games, you could go over to the counter and just eat a bunch of cheese or crackers and that kind of thing. So that's usually how we do it at our place. The next question comes from Steve from Twitter. Sorry, I didn't actually write down your handle, but he asks, any deception or time games that you like? And this is obviously a loaded question. It's obvious that Steve knows that in general, I don't like time games, and in general, I don't like deception games. So yeah, I can say a couple. I really like Captain Sonar. That's a timed game where you don't have a timer that's ticking down at you, but it's real time, and your timer is essentially doing things before your opponents do so that you can try and destroy their submarine. Another one I really like is Dimension. That one is a timed game where it's real time and everyone's building a stack of little colored balls, and there are a variety of different rules that you're playing by as for each given scenario, and you're trying to make sure that, you know, the white and the black balls don't touch and that the orange balls are always on top and that kind of stuff. And you only have about a minute to do that one. And for some reason, I really like that one. It's enough time to just jump in, and the stress of the time just kind of works as you're just putting this whole thing together, and it's a fully simultaneous kind of, and a fully multiplayer solitaire game where you're just doing your own little thing. You're building your own little sandcastle, and then once you're done, you look around and see how everybody else did, and then you score points based on some criteria, and you just hope that you did better than everybody else. So you could play a 2-player game of that, you could play a 100-player game of that, and there would be no actual ramifications on the gameplay. And maybe that's part of the reason why I like the timedness of that. Looking at the games I have behind me, I might be missing something, but for the most part, I think those are the only 2 main time games that I have out there, and if they're not up here, then I probably didn't like them that much to really mention them. When it comes to Deception, the only one that I can think of that I actually have behind me is A Fake Artist Goes to New York. And this one is kind of a drawing version of Spyfall, where everybody but one person around the table knows what the picture is supposed to be, and then the one person who doesn't know tries to figure it out, and everybody draws a line onto this piece of art, but they try not to be too obvious to give away what it is to the artist, and it's fun. It's fun enough for me to keep it anyway. It's not a go-to game for me. Like, I'll play it when people bring it out, and it's a tiny game, so it's easy to keep up on the shelf. And it's a tiny little one over there. You can't even see it. There we go. It's a tiny little game. But other than that, I was kind of looking at the games behind me, and I don't think I have any other Deception games at all. It's not a type of game that I enjoy enough to keep around. I did like Deception Murder in Hong Kong, okay, but again, not enough to actually keep it on the shelf. That one did a reasonable job of making it not a terrible experience for me to be the murderer in the game, and that's usually why I don't like these Deception games. In general, even in this game, if I become the fake artist, I have this sense of dread and impending doom when I flip that over. I hate being that person. The best part of any Deception game for me when I actually sit down to play them is when I flip over the cards and see that I am not the traitor. So anyway, that's a relatively long answer to your question, but not that many games really that I could say. The last question comes from Sabin Schmidt, and he asks, what is your favorite and least favorite mechanisms in games? Well, let's start with least favorite, because I think I just already covered that. It's got to be hidden traitor roles. And as I just mentioned before, the anxiety over if I'm going to be the traitor or not is just crushing. And the moment I flip it over, if I am the traitor, oh, such a terrible feeling, because now I have to lie and I start stressing out, and I'm so obvious, so then it's not fun for everybody else because I have this anxiety of, you know, trying to do well and knowing that I won't, and then also not trying to spoil the gaming experience for everybody around the table, especially if there are 2 traitors, because I don't want to spoil it for that other person by being so terrible at it. I really don't like deception-based games. It just does not work for my brain in the slightest. But when it comes to my favorite mechanisms, there are quite a few mechanisms that I like, but I think I keep coming back to my favorite mechanism being incentivization. So this is the idea where based on how you play out in the game, certain things get better and better until they get picked for some reason. So it could be Puerto Rico, where the action slots that are not taken get a money put on them every single turn until finally somebody takes one of those. Or it could be another game like Firenze, which I think at the moment is my favorite version of this incentivization mechanic, where you have a row of cards, and the first card is free. If you want the second card, you have to put something down, a resource down on the first card. If you want the 5th card, you have to put something down on all 4 of the previous cards. And a really brilliant part about that game in particular is that not all the cards are good. In fact, some of them are terrible. They're actually disasters that cause you to lose stuff. So obviously you don't want to take that card. Losing stuff is bad, so you skip over it, putting stuff down on it. But at some point, these cards never get wiped away due to inaction. They only get pulled by somebody thinking it's finally worth it. And there will come a point where there'll be enough stuff on that warehouse fire, for instance, that it actually is good for a player to take this warehouse fire, suffer the penalty, but get all of these other stuff as a benefit because it's been incentivized slowly and slowly throughout the game. I think it is a completely brilliant and very elegant way of balancing the value of stuff in games. Like, let the players kind of figure it out. In a sense, it's almost like kind of a long-term auction where you're just like, you're saying, no, I don't want that. No, I don't want that. It's not worth it. It's worth losing commodities to not take that thing and take something else. And yeah, I just freaking love it. That's part of the reason why I'm so excited about Caravan, the Spice Road that's coming out soon, because it's like a mixture of that specific type of incentivization mechanic where you put resources down on cards until you find the one you want, mixed with kind of some Splendor-style light engine building action. I'm very much looking forward to that game, and it's all about that incentivization mechanic. I think I am looking to try any game with that mechanic in it. If somebody managed to make a hidden roll the session game with that incentivization mechanic, I still think I would actually be excited to play it. It actually overrides my feelings for that other mechanism. If you have any questions you'd like me to answer on an upcoming variety vlog, please feel free to shoot those over to me at JonGetsGames@gmail.com, and I will add them to the list. Let's now move into the Games of Note segment, and these are all the games that I played over this last month that were either new to me or I just wanted to talk about them because it's been a long time or I have something in particular to say about that play. I have 6 that I'll be covering this month, which is less than other months, and a big part of that is because of the first one, and that one is Gloomhaven. I'm going to try not to talk about this one forever, but this game has completely blown my socks off, and it is a scenario-based tactical dungeon crawl style game where you have a hero and you are running through this dungeon and you're trying to kill everything as much as you can in very creative ways. It's a fully cooperative game, and I have just been so impressed with this game. It's really kind of taken hold of me in a very strong way. Each scenario that you sit down to play is probably 2 to 3 hours, depending on the group, but that's kind of what it's ended up being for me. And I have played 10 different scenarios over this last month, which is humongous. It wasn't 10 specific sit-down sessions. Some of them I played 2 or even 3 scenarios in a row in a setting, but I've spent a lot of my gaming time over the last month playing Gloomhaven and really loving it because well, let's talk about it. So it's fully cooperative. Everybody has their own specific class, and this game does not have a lot of storytelling in the middle of each scenario, but on a broader perspective, there is a wonderful amount of enriched storyline stuff going on because there is this campaign that is like, I don't know, 50 or 60 scenarios long. The box comes with, I think, 95 scenarios, but some of them kind of branch out where you have to choose one or the other, and by doing this one, you will never be able to do that other one. So it kind of has a long-term choose-your-own-adventure style thing going on where it's like, do you want to go over here and help these people or go over there and help their opponents? Like, which side do you choose? And that type of decision structure. Also, you just have a variety of things you could do. I have essentially been in 3 different campaigns over those 10 different scenarios. The main campaign I'm playing, we've done 7 scenarios in, and when we sit down to play our 8th scenario, I think we have 5 different things we could do. We could, go into the city and help this one person who asked me for help, or we could go into the mountains and stop some people in a mine, and we could go into that crypt over there. There's so many different options, and we kind of get to collectively decide, where are we going to go today? What adventure are we going to do? So let's talk about the nitty-gritty of how you actually play this game, because that is a big part of the reason why this is so exciting. I've played other dungeon crawls that had big campaigns, and the campaign is fun, and the story is fun. I don't think it's like astonishing literature, but I've enjoyed that part. But the actual playing of the game is such a satisfying experience because you have, well, every single person starts with a big hand of cards. The number of cards you have in your hand is different for each of the different classes in the game. And the game, at the beginning of the scenario, of the campaign, you have 6 different classes you can choose from. Some of them are a bit tropey, like, a brute is kind of like a barbarian, and you have a scoundrel, which is kind of like a rogue. But then you have a cragheart, which is the one I've been playing, which is not really like any other specific fantasy trope that I can think of. It's kind of an earth druid melee range character who has magic and doing a whole bunch of different stuff. I can throw big rocks, that kind of thing. And I've really enjoyed playing that kind of weird character. And so I start the game with, oh my gosh, I'm on the spot, I think 12 or 11 cards in my hand, something like that. And every single turn, you pick 2 cards out of your hand, and every card has a top and a bottom area. And what you do is you use the top of one of the cards and the bottom of the other card to make a complete action, essentially, of various things you can do. And the top parts of the cards usually punch things, and the bottom parts of the cards usually have kind of secondary effects like moving around or setting traps or that kind of stuff. And what this means is you have an awesome puzzle every single turn trying to figure out a good combo of a top card and a bottom card based on where you are at and where your opponents, where the opposing figures are on the field, as well as all of your companions. And then on top of that, a big problem that cooperative games have is quarterbacking, where one person tells everybody else what to do. And there is some significant hidden information in this game between you and your companions. It's trying to simulate the idea that you are moving through this dungeon. You can't just stop and strategize for 10 minutes when stuff is coming over to attack you. You can kind of yell things quickly like, I'm going to go over here and smack that. But you can't say, I'm going to do a 3 damage attack. If you walk to this specific spot, it'll actually be a 5 damage attack. I'm going to do it on initiative 13, so make sure you move before I move. You can't do any of those specifics. You could just say, I'm going over there really fast. It would be great if you helped me out and stood next to that thing. And that is cool. The way you actually figure out whose turn it is off of initiative numbers that are on the cards you play. These can run from 1 all the way up to 99. And so if I say I'm going fast and my partner says they're going fast, and it's really important for me that they go first because maybe they're blocking me or they're in my way, I need to decide what is fast to them. You know, is fast 12? Is it 13? Is it 15? I'm going at 17. Is that too fast? If we flip over and they reveal a 19, which is still pretty darn fast, and I have a 17, then my plans kind of go up in smoke because I'm going before them and now, you know, I can't do the cool combo I wanted to do. So maybe I don't do it that way. Maybe I do a different card that'll go at 35 or 40 and I'm like, okay, I'll definitely be going after that person. And these are all really cool decisions that you're making, in addition to the fact that all of the stuff that's on these cards are interesting stuff. Like every single one of the classes has a unique deck of cards that they're playing from, and every top action can be used secondarily as just a 2 damage attack, and every bottom action can be used secondarily as a move 2. But beyond that, every single action has something special and cool on the top and the bottom. So you are making these awesome combos. Like maybe I run over there. When I stop, I actually stun the person next to me. And then I do an attack that hits 3 different things and pushes them back or something like that. And then when I push them back, my partner said it would be really great if, you know, this enemy got a little bit closer to me. And like there's this awesome planning and teamwork aspect to it without giving away too much information back and forth between everybody around the table. And then what sets in is this exhaustion mechanic where every time you run out of cards in your hand because you're playing them down, they don't come back up into your hand immediately. You need to rest. And when you rest, you either randomly discard one of those cards and you have lost it for the entire game or for the entire scenario, or you essentially pause for an entire turn and choose one of these cards to remove. But every time you rest, you lose a card from that hand. So as you get deeper and deeper in the dungeon, your hand of cards and options gets smaller and smaller and smaller to simulate you getting more and more tired as time goes on. And if you ever run out of health because you get hit too many times, you start having to just discard cards from your hand or your discard pile to mitigate that damage, because if you ever go to 0, you're just out for the scenario. It doesn't mean you're going to lose. If the team wins, then you still win and you get perks, but it's a really great mechanic. It really does simulate this feeling of getting more tired. You start off the scenario, you have so many options, and near the end, you're doing the same thing. Not the same thing, but you're kind of doing a dwindling number of things back and forth until your last gasp. You play the cards and you either keel over with exhaustion or maybe you win the scenario or something like that. And the balance of the scenarios that I've seen has been very tight. I think I've lost 3 or 4 out of those 10 scenarios, something like that. And the ones that I've won, almost all of them have felt like it could have gone either way. Like it really is tight. There is a tension and a fun stress involved in trying to finalize this stuff out. And there is randomness involved here. There are no dice in the game. Every time you do an attack, you actually draw from a deck of modifier cards. And this is another super cool thing because as you're going through the game, you're accruing experience by doing different actions. Once you've done several scenarios, you will get enough experience to level up. And you also have some goals in the middle of the scenarios, hidden goals that you can't tell any of your partners about, that might also give you little perks that will let you modify that little deck of cards. So you might pull it and it's a -2 damage to that attack, or you might pull it and it's a miss. but once you level up, you might take out that -2 from the deck. So it's just not there anymore, which makes that overall modifier deck slightly better. Or maybe you will remove all the zeros, or you will add a card in there that means that you stun and then you do damage. You can modify that modifier deck as well as your hand of cards. Every time you level up, you get new cards that you bring in. And every time you sit down to do a scenario, you always start with the same number of cards, but you have some deck pre-construction or hand construction essentially doing at the beginning of every scenario because you have more cards that you can bring. So you look at the scenario, it's all set up, and you decide, this card isn't good for me in this one, I'll bring this one in here. And at this point, I should probably wrap it up because I'm talking about this a lot. I hope I've conveyed how interesting and excited I am about this game, but also how much stuff is going on. There is so many things going on. I think the rulebook is like 56 pages, and there's a gigantic official FAQ on the internet to help cover things that were not even in the rulebook. It's actually a really good rulebook. There's just so much going on that there's lots of edge cases, and I did a full playthrough of it. I published it last week, and I found like 20 mistakes that I made, and then I sent it over to the designer, and then he found like 20 more mistakes, and I put it up on the internet, and I think people have found even more mistakes in there because there's just so many little things going on. But at the end of the day, I've played 10 scenarios, and I'm still really excited to keep playing it. This one is, I'm hoping to keep it in rotation with all the other games I'm doing. In general, I don't do campaigns because I have so many new games and fresh games that I want to play, but I'm still quite excited to see how this one goes. I haven't even mentioned that your characters will retire after like 10 to 15 scenarios, and then you get to unlock new stuff in kind of a legacy style aspect, although realistically, to me, it's a campaign game. There's just so much in this box. It's gigantic, it's heavy, it's super exciting, and there's actually a Kickstarter running for it right now. This is not an advertisement or anything, but just so you know, if this sounds interesting to you and you're watching this in the next week or two, you should check out the Kickstarter page and see if it actually is for you, because that's probably the best way that you can actually get your hands on it. So yeah, I heartily recommend it. I need to stop talking about Gloomhaven now. Let's move on to the next game. And that would be Kanban. I played a 2-player game of this online with my friend Efka. In fact, we played it to cover it on our podcast. It's called Last Place, and we talked about our impressions of the game and how it went, but I'll talk about it here as well. If you want to listen to that podcast, you can find it wherever you find your other podcasts. But what's going on in Kanban is it's a heavy style game. It's not a crazy heavy game, but it's on the lighter edge of heavy, if that makes sense. And it's designed by Vital Lacerda, and it's about making cars. There's apparently a system called Kanban, which has to do with methodologies and like structured pushing things through factories. I'm not going to talk about it anymore because honestly, I'll embarrass myself because I don't know what Kanban actually means. But in the purpose of this game, it's a worker placement style game where you have one worker, and you always have one worker. It's essentially you, and you're working your way through this factory trying to get these cars together. You are grabbing different parts for the cars, you're grabbing plans for the cars, you might go and actually push some cars through production, and all of these things do various good stuff for you. There are also ways that you can specialize and get better at every single department in this factory, because there is a non-player character called Sandra who walks through this line of worker placement stuff. So down the middle of the board, all the worker placement locations are in a line, and Sandra just moves from one end to the other, and then when she gets to the end, she moves back to the front. And whenever she stops on a location, she kind of judges that location, and whoever's doing the best in that location either gets a perk, or whoever's doing the worst in that location gets a penalty. It depends. You can play the game either mean Sandra or nice Sandra. We played it mean Sandra, so it didn't matter if you were ahead, but if you were behind, and in a 2-player game, it's pretty much the same thing. There was a penalty or in that case. And man, this game was really cool. There's a lot going on in here, and it's the 4th, I think, Vital Lacerda game I've played. I've played the Gallerist, Vinhos, Lisboa, and yeah, Kanban. So it's the 4th one I've played. And at this point, I think it's my 2nd favorite. Lisboa is still my favorite, but I enjoyed Kanban more than Vinhos, and I enjoyed Vinhos more than the Gallerist. And I think part of the reason for that is there's a lot of good stuff that you're thinking about. There's a lot of great decisions that you're making in the middle of the turns in Kanban, but you don't necessarily have structures for lots of quick little bonus actions like in Vinhos. You can build a little bit of an engine with your specialists that let you do pop different things and do some bonuses, and those are nice, but it's added complications onto the game. And the turn structure is pretty self-explanatory, unlike in the Gallerist, which can get a bit wonky, like whose turn is it because you went here, and then that other person got to go and there's a secondary action. And I guess I can't really rag on that too much because Lisboa, the one I like the most, does have out of order turn structures. But I don't know, it's hard to put my finger on why I like Kanban more than Vinhos and the Gallerist, but I certainly did. There's a lot of really cool things going on here. I enjoyed the process of trying to plan a couple turns ahead. There's a neat tempo mechanic where how far to the edge of the board you put your worker is going to dictate how soon you get to place your worker on the next round. So if you go really late in the turn order, then you're going to evaluate later, which is going to be bad for you, and then you're going to pick later on the next round, which is also probably going to be bad for you. So there's a lot of things that you need to think about this turn and next turn. There's a lot of planning that goes on here. And then a couple times throughout the game, you have this meeting where you all sit down to a meeting. You have acquired a certain number of seats. Seats at this table are actually a resource you essentially generate by doing different things in the game. And then with these seats, you can take scoring tiles that will give you points and kind of deny those points from other players. There's a whole bunch of different stuff going on here. It's a big, dense board with a whole bunch of color. I don't think I want to go into too many more specifics on it, but I will say that I quite enjoyed it. And a good friend of mine is planning on buying a copy, so I'm looking forward to trying a 3 or maybe even 4-player game. It was good at 2 players, but I feel like I'm looking forward to maybe a little bit more variety of what's going on, a little bit more tension of people blocking you and all that kind of stuff with a multiplayer game. And in general, I like my first play enough to want to play it again. And I didn't mention it before, but the games I'm covering in this section are kind of in order from the one I enjoy the most to the one I enjoy the least. So this is the second best game I played over the last month, and I really enjoyed it. I'm looking forward to playing it again. The third game is Odyssey, Wrath of Poseidon. My friend Dave owns a copy of this, and I've actually played it twice now. And this is a weird game. It's a one versus many style game where one person plays Poseidon and everybody else controls these little ships. And all they're trying to do is get the ship to the center of this board. It's a bunch of a square grid, and all the ships kind of start in the corners, and in the very middle there's this island with a rainbow on it. You want to get to that rainbow island, and if you get 3 out of the 4 ships there by the time the game ends, then you win. But the really interesting thing that's going on here is that you don't actually know exactly where your ship is. So the Poseidon player kind of covers up a map area where they have the ships on the board, and that is where the ships actually are. This is Poseidon. He controls the ocean. And on the player's turns, they just say a direction they want to go in. They say northeast or southwest. And so you can move obviously orthogonally or diagonally on the board. And then the Poseidon player will move it on their own board. And that is where the ship actually is, but the players who are controlling the ships don't see that. They just see where they think the ship is, and the thing is that every single turn the Poseidon player can choose to move one of the ships on the board in a direction and not tell the people who's piloting the ship what direction they went. And then if things are getting too good for the players, the Poseidon player can move all of the ships once in a direction and not tell people where they are. So this is a really cool simulation of being on the ocean and having the waves just kind of knocking you around, and it might be stormy and you can't quite see. And so you're not exactly sure where you are. And every time you move, say you say, I move west, then the Poseidon player moves you and then tells you some information about where you are. They give you exact information about the location you're at. They might say you're in deep water or you're in calm water. They might say that you see a red ship, and that means that you're on the same exact spot as the red ship, which might give you a lot of information. And then they give you less good information about all the spots you can see that are adjacent to you. The information is always accurate, but in this case, instead of, like, if you were on an island spot, he would say it's a rocky island or it's a green island. If you're next to that island, he would say you see an island. So you don't know if it's rocky or a verdant green island. So oftentimes you'll stop and he'll say, you see 2 islands. And now you look to the board and you try to figure out, based on how you moved and how that Poseidon player could have potentially moved you, how could you find yourself in a position that you are adjacent to 2 islands, or maybe 1 island, or just, you might say you see nothing at all, and that means you're just in open water, and you have all these little tokens that you could put down on the board to simulate the different spots that you think you could be at. So it's a really cool deduction game for the players who are trying to pilot all these ships. They say, well, he could have done this, so I could be here, and he could have also done that, so that means I'm over here, and he could have done this other thing, so I'm in one of these 3 spots. And then the next turn comes around and maybe he doesn't move your specific ship, and now you move west and he tells you some information and you're like, it can't be this one or this one, so I know I am right here. And that is where a lot of the joy of the game comes from. And the first game we won somewhat handily, and the second game I'm pretty sure we lost, and it was looking like we were doing really good, but what ended up happening is one player missed one potential spot they could be. Like, they were kind of mathing it out. We're all mathing it out together. And like, I could be here, here, or here, but there was a fourth spot they could have been in that all of us missed, and that is where the ship actually was. And so we kept playing like that wasn't even an option. And then my friend did a turn, and we're like, wait, that's impossible. And at the end of the game, we actually ran out of time. We didn't make it all the way, and we revealed, and that player's ship was like 10 spots away from where we thought it was, or something crazy. It was a really long way because of a escalating ramifications of the Poseidon player moving the ship, and also the player piloting the ship not thinking they knew where they were, but not actually knowing where they were. So it's a really neat game. It simulates the idea of being on the ocean and not really knowing where you are, and kind of getting glimpses of the horizon and what's going on. I enjoyed playing it. I haven't played as Poseidon yet. I think that'd be an interesting way to try it. Both games I've played, been piloting the ships. I'm glad my friend has it. I'm looking forward to trying it again. Game number 4 is Fugitive. I backed this on Kickstarter, and it just arrived. It's got a really cool / annoying box. It's got this kind of briefcase looking thing with a magnetic thing that flips up, but it has one of my biggest pet peeves in board gaming, where it does not have the name of the game on any of the sides. So when it's on my shelf, you see this little briefcase side thing, but you don't know that it's the Fugitive. And I like the briefcase side, but maybe make the back side say the Fugitive so I can choose between the two spots. But either way, let's talk about how the game actually plays. This is a 2-player only asymmetric style game where one person is a fugitive trying to run away from the authorities, and the other person is the authorities trying to catch the fugitive. And it's a deduction style game where the fugitive player has a hand of cards, and the cards number, I believe, 1 through 42, and they always start with the numbers like 1, 2, and 3 in their hand, and then they can start drawing some higher level cards. And they put these cards face down into a line in the middle of the table, and they have some rules they have to abide by. They can't go beyond a specific gap. I think it was 2. I don't remember the specifics, but a certain jump between the values of the cards as you are actually running. And if the gap is larger than that, then you can burn a couple other cards that have these little sprint tokens on them to make up for the difference. But that means you are losing cards from your hand, which means you have less card options for the future. And every time on the turns, the fugitive player puts down a card that they're kind of running, or they choose not to run because maybe they don't have a good card to do. And then it goes to the agent who is trying to track down the fugitive. And all they do on their turn is they draw a card so they know a place that the fugitive can't be. They kind of log it down on a board so they're keeping track of this stuff. And then they guess. They say, have you been to location 7? And if the fugitive player has, then they flip over that spot, and that's more information for the agent. And the game ends if the fugitive player is able to get all the way to number 42, which is the getaway helicopter, I believe. And the other side is the agent wins if they are able to reveal the entire trail. So they guess every single card that has been played out by the fugitive. Now, I've played this once, and I played as the fugitive, and I lost. I got kind of close, but I was not drawing very well. I was doing really well up to the stages of the game. And when you draw cards, you draw from these 3 different stacks. One is kind of early numbers that are like 1 to 16. The next one is middle numbers that range from like 17 or 18 up to the high 20s. And then the last stack is the high 20s all the way up to potentially 41, because you begin the game with a 42 in your hand. So you never are going to lose because you didn't draw the final card. You have that in your hand. But what I found is when I got to the middle stages, I kept drawing from that stack, and I kept drawing really high cards. So I was at like 28, and I kept drawing like 37, and then 39. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't make that jump. And I ended up having to pass a couple rounds because I couldn't play a card down. The gap was too large, and the agent player was able to catch up. I was I think if I had had one more turn, it was possible I would have been able to do a skip jump and maybe make it all the way to the end. It was relatively close. But I enjoyed playing it. I'm looking forward to trying it from the agent's perspective, that kind of guessing game of figuring out what you know and what you maybe know. And the other thing is that the fugitive player can put the sprint cards down and bluff with them. They might not need that sprint card to do the gap, but by doing the sprint card, the agent now sees that the fugitive sprinted, and they think, they had to go farther, so they might get kind of thrown off the trail. Or maybe they will read through the eyes of the Fugitive player that they actually are just kind of bluffing in that respect. So yeah, I'm looking forward to trying this one again. It's a neat game. It was like 20 minutes. There's quite a bit of thought and really great art in it. It's a pretty cool little package, and I'm curious to see how it plays out with more plays of it. There's also a bunch of events that you can put in as a variant that will kind of mix things up. So there's quite a little bit going on in this really cool but poorly labeled box. Game number 5 is Rosenkönig, or The Rose King is the English version of it. I played Rosenkönig because I played this on the iPad. I've had this game for a couple years now, actually, and I played a game of it with Jessica this last month, and I remembered how much I really like this game. And specifically, one of the reasons I'm talking about it is because this is one of those games that is purely better on the iPad versus actually playing it in person. Because what's going on here is you have a square grid, and each player has tokens. There are these tokens that can be either your color or flip it over to be the opponent's color. And there is a king figurine starts in the middle of the board. And every single turn, all you do is you play one of your cards that you have in front of you, and it'll move the king some number of spaces in one given direction. But the catch here is that the cards you have in your hand are not actually in your hand, they're face up on the table. This is a 2-player only game, so you always can see what your options for your opponent are, and they can always see what your options are as well. And whenever you play a card, it does not auto-refill, so you're going to keep maybe playing cards and your options dwindle, so on your turn you either play a card, or you can just draw a card from the top of the stack so you'll have more options for your future turns. So turns are quite simple, and whenever the king lands, you put down a token of your color. And here is where the iPad to playing it in person perspective comes into play, because I haven't actually played it in person, and I don't think I ever want to, because the way you score points in the game is you get a kind of escalating amount of points for contiguous groups of your tokens. So if you have 2 tokens next to each other, I believe it's 2 times 2 or 4 points. If you have 3 tokens next to each other, that's 3 times 3 or 9 points. And that means you're doing a lot of math if you are playing this on the table. And it also means it's kind of hard to tell where you're at versus your opponent. Versus when you're playing on the iPad, it constantly tells you exactly your score and exactly your opponent's score, which is nice. The other aspect that's great about playing it on the iPad versus playing it in person is that the iPad kind of grays out all of the movement cards in front of you and your opponent that are not doable. So that's another interesting part of the game, is that you know what your opponent's options are, so you could play a card that moves the king to a position that makes it so that your opponent cannot play any of their cards, because it would move the king either off of the board or onto one of my tokens. And so the king can jump onto one of your opponent's tokens 4 times in the game and kind of take over that token. But once you've used all 4 of those, your options really dwindle down. So a big part of the game is maybe playing such that your opponent loses turns. And since turns are so quick, losing turns is not that big of a deal in the game. And again, when you're playing on the iPad, you just look over and you see the grayed out options. So you know what are available to you and what aren't, whereas you need to crunch those and kind of think those through in person. I'm not saying I would never play it in person, but these are all the reasons why I haven't actually bought a copy and put it on my shelf, because I actually think it's a really cool game. Unfortunately, Jessica doesn't like it too much, but I really quite like this game. And, you know, I don't know, maybe some point I will get a copy because it is so neat, but I also oftentimes have my iPad with me. I just need to remember that at a game night with a 2-player game, I can just get out my iPad and be like, let's just play this game. You can teach the rules in like 40 seconds, and it's a pretty deep little abstract game. It's got a lot of neat stuff going on. They did reprint it recently, and they did call it The Rose King, but it's called Rosenkönig in the iOS, and I really recommend you give it a shot. There's also a pretty good single-player campaign on the iPad where you can play different scenarios against the computer. I played quite a few of them and have enjoyed those a lot. So that is Rosenkönig. The 6th and last game of note is Sweet Nose, and this is the one I liked the least out of all the ones I've covered here. I didn't dislike it, but I also didn't necessarily like it that much. I was relatively neutral to it, but it's got some weird, kooky stuff going on that I want to talk about. I had never heard of this game before. It was picked up by a friend of mine while he was in China, and I guess there is a somewhat elaborate folk story that kind of gives you the backdrop to this game, but at the end of the day, it's a game about eating various foods and trying to score points based off of those things, and specifically, if things can be kind of too sweet, then you are somewhat penalized for that. And it's got these great little tokens for the food that you put down, and mechanically what you do, it's a relatively simple game. At the beginning of each round, you personally decide what the value for all the different foods are for yourself, and you kind of hide it on a little stand, and you kind of move them around. So you're like, okay, The green little button things are going to be worth 3 points to me this round, and you don't want points in this game. You want the least amount of points. And you have some points, you have some food on a plate in front of you, and then once you start playing, on your turn, you have a couple different options, but one of the main ones is you can either force some of your food into the mouth of someone else. It's like just throwing it into their mouth. Or you can potentially sometimes swap food around from like one plate to another, or you could grab a piece of food from somebody else's plate and put it into your mouth. And you just kind of keep going around until one person's plate is empty. And then at that point, everybody needs to eat everything that is left over on their plate, which in general, you don't want to eat things. You're actually trying to not eat as much as possible, or if you have to eat, you eat the least sweet things, because again, sweet is bad in this case. It's very peculiar. And then you reveal your scoring tokens, and then you gain points based on all the food that is in your stomach. And then after you do the first round, based on the number of points that people have, the person who has the most points, and again, points are bad, can then select from these one-time power use tokens. And there are a couple different sets of variety ones in the box that can do special powers that you can do on your turn instead of doing something else. It was a very peculiar experience. The tokens are cute. The art is interesting. The actions themselves are kind of funny. But what I ended up finding, I think we played 3 rounds, and I think I came in second, something like that. What I ended up finding is that it was pretty simplistic. Like it oftentimes seemed like there was an obvious best move, and there is a little bit of deduction going on here based on, you see one opponent, it keeps eating one specific type of food, well, that must mean that that is a low-scoring thing. And if you think that opponent is doing well, you can kind of target them, because another thing you can do is swap food out with a market that's in the middle of the board that is going to add even more bonus points for eating those specific foods. So you see one person grabbed 3 of that one specific thing, you throw one of those things in the middle, and now that's 3 more points they're going to be getting, that you think, because that's how they're actively eating. But there's not enough time to really do all that much targeting, and honestly, I'm not in love with that kind of targeting aspect in games in general anyway. We probably played it for about 60 minutes, which was maybe about 15 minutes longer than I'd like to. It was an okay experience all around. It was certainly goofy. I don't think I would tell people not to play this game. Like, if you have the option of playing it, give it a shot. It's simple, and it's certainly a weird theme, and having weird themes in games is cool. Like, I like seeing a variety of stuff, and my friend actually told the whole folklore story before we sat down to play the game, and unfortunately I don't remember enough to really tell you it now, but it definitely has a tall tale vibe to it, and it's just a weird, odd little package, and I had an okay time, I guess, playing it, although I am okay with not playing it again. Next up, let's move into the shifting shelf segment. Now, this is where I show you all the new games that I've acquired over the last month, as well as all the games that I have gotten rid of. And you are probably now noticing, A, there is a humongous list of 16 games that I got rid of last month, and B, you might have noticed throughout this whole video that there are some actual holes behind me on my wall, and that is because the once annual live endgame auction happened last month, and this is a prime opportunity for me to pull a bunch of stuff off my shelf that I just don't think I'm going to be actively wanting to play anymore, and put them into the auction. I get a bunch of store credit so I can buy new stuff, and having holes is good because we're in the slow season right now, but once the conventions start really hitting again, I will certainly be acquiring lots of new games. So first of all, when we look at the games that I acquired, The Fugitive is the only full complete game that I got over this last month, and that was a Kickstarter reward that came in. I already talked about that one. I also was able to grab, I received prototypes for The King's Champion and Sailing Towards Osiris. Both of those games I will be doing playthroughs for Kickstarters. In fact, The King's Champion is live on Kickstarter right now, and I'm hoping to get a playthrough done of that before the Kickstarter campaign ends. And the King's Champion is a 2-player only kind of medium weight worker placement Euro style jousting game of like jousting knights at each other. There's a bit of engine building going on there. It's got a pretty interesting amount of stuff going on. I'm looking forward to doing a playthrough for that. And then Sailing Towards Osiris is a medium weight Euro that plays 2 to 4 players, and you have a little boat sailing down the Nile, and you're trying to construct monuments to the pharaoh who has died, who is sailing down on this boat. So I'm looking forward to getting into that one a little bit more, and I'm doing a playthrough for that one for their Kickstarter campaign. So now, looking over at the stuff that is leaving the shelf, I'm going to briefly go over why I decided to get rid of all these, because people are oftentimes curious about those. But again, the big reason for this massive purge was to get stuff into that auction, because I need space for new stuff. So in alphabetical order, the first one is But Wait, There's More. This is a party-style game of trying to do infomercials where you're trying to sell your friends on various wacky stuff. And I had a pretty good time playing it. A couple of times we did play it, but at the end of the day, when we're in the mood for playing party style games, it's maybe a little bit more complex than I'm looking for, and I'd rather just do bowl of nouns or, you know, essentially monikers and that style of game, like something simpler for those party style atmospheres, because usually we're like, you know, maybe a little bit tipsy because we're drinking some beer and we're at a party atmosphere. At that point, you know, getting out a game like But Wait, There's More, it's got a lot of little things going on. So at the end of the day, it wasn't hitting the table. We decided to get rid of it. Next up is Dragon Punch. This is a 2-player only game that doesn't require a table of dueling, of just like punching each other back and forth like Street Fighter. It's got great mechanics. If you like that style of game, it's awesome. I backed the Kickstarter and I never once played it. And that was a couple years ago. So I decided to get rid of it. Next up is Emerald. This, I've had this for a while, and this game uses the mechanic where you have tokens on spots, and you can move as many spots as there are tokens on that spot, like opponents. And you have these little knights trying to raid a cave from this dragon named Emerald. And it has some set collection with the knights, and I really love this mechanic, and I got the game because I wanted a good game with that mechanic. But then I was able to grab a copy of Finca, which is, let's see, right here. And this is a Euro-style game with that same exact mechanic, where you have a kind of windmill where you move your farmers based on the number of farmers that are on that specific spot. And I just felt like it was a much better version of that specific mechanic, and the luck of the draw on the cards and the options you have in Emerald were not great enough for me to keep it around. It was a really skinny box, but I decided to move that one on. It wasn't getting played. Someone else will hopefully enjoy it. Now we have Farmageddon. This was sent over for me to do a playthrough for the retail launch. It's a pretty light take that style game, and that's just not my style of game. I think if you are into that vibe of games, this is a very well done version of it. It's got great art on it. But if I'm going to be playing a filler style game, it's probably not going to be a take that style filler game. So that's why I got rid of that one. Next up is Flamme Rouge. This I did a full playthrough of. It's a bicycle racing game. It just, at the end of the day, was not interesting enough. It was an okay experience, but it took up a lot of space on the shelf. Hopefully somebody else will enjoy it more than me. I didn't dislike it. I was very neutral to it. I would totally play it again, but I felt like the decisions were nowhere near as interesting as I was kind of hoping they would be. It was a little too simplistic for me. Maybe I wasn't really getting the game, but at the end of the day, maybe somebody else will. Now we have Hamster Roll. This is a dexterity game where you have a big wheel on the table with these little kind of rudders on them, like little flanges, and on your turn you just put a piece of wood down on this wheel and it kind of rolls, and you always have to go in one direction, so it slowly rolls, and the hope is that you will get rid of all your pieces of wood. But if you put down too heavy of a piece, it'll roll so much that more pieces of wood will fall down, and then you have to take those, and if a lot fall down, then it'll keep rolling and just spill a whole bunch. And I've enjoyed this game. I played it a bunch of times, but then I got Junk Art, and Junk Art is just such a great version of stacking pieces of various shaped pieces of wood. It's just a way better game. So why bother having both of them? I decided to get rid of Hamster Roll. Now we have Hocus. This I also, actually I did a playthrough, a preview for this game. This is before I did playthroughs for Kickstarter. It is a, it's essentially, you have a backbone of Texas Hold'em poker, but you have this much bigger game on top of it where you're trying to make these different poker hands, but you have various magic spells that you are using. They have asymmetric abilities, so you might have like night magic versus over there like nature magic or something like that, which give you very powerful swingy actions, and you are actually building out a hand of Texas Hold'em poker style, if that makes sense. So instead of just drawing randomly from the top of a deck, you are actually building the flop that's in the middle of the table, and sometimes the cards are face down, sometimes they're face up, and you get points based off of this. And it was an interesting game, but I was not compelled enough to have it come out much at all, and so it's kind of sat on the shelf for a while, so I decided it was time to move that one on. Now we have Holmes, Sherlock versus Mycroft. This is a 2-player only worker placement game. And I always find those to be kind of interesting, like that idea of a 2-player only game. It's designed just for 2 players, and you have this worker placement aspect. And this one, you are doing set collection, and both workers can go to a certain spot, but if they do, then that spot gets exhausted and you can't use it for the next round. Every time you play, the way the action slots come out is going to be different. But I found that when I actually played it a couple times, me and my opponent just sort of did the same thing over and over again. Like we kind of copied each other because it seemed like those were the right decisions. It was an okay experience, but I did not feel terribly, I didn't get a sense of depth to the play, and it just seems like when we're just constantly copying each other back and forth, it was not a terribly interesting experience. Now we have Limes. This game I've had for a while. This is, again, a two-player only game. And in a sense, it's kind of like a precursor to Karuba, where one person shovels up a deck of cards and the other person has an ordered deck of cards. The person who shovels it up reveals the top card, and then the other player finds that card, and then they both play it into a growing tableau. And at the end of the game, whoever has the most points based off of adjacencies and all that kind of stuff is going to win the game. Now that I think about it, it's kind of like a mix of Honshu and Karuba. It's like if Honshu had everybody playing the same exact cards down every single turn, the kind of scoring mechanisms are all very similar. The reason I got rid of it is because I just like Karuba better. It's a similar vibe. It plays up to 4 players. It's a much bigger box, unfortunately, but I didn't see a reason to have both of those on the shelf. Now we have Mr. Jack. Jessica actually picked this one up at the endgame auction 3 years ago, and this is also a 2-player only game where one person plays Jack the Ripper trying to escape, and the other person plays the police and authorities trying to deduce out who on this map is Jack the Ripper, because there are a bunch of different characters. And we played it a couple times and thought it was okay both of the times we played it, but at the end of the day, it was also a pretty big box, and it just didn't grab us enough to stick around. Now we have Nerdy Inventions. This was sent to me by Mayday Games. It's a little dice rolling engine building game. I honestly never actually got it to the table. I just was not really that interested in playing it, and I just didn't feel like having it around to potentially play it at some point. It didn't make sense. After that, I have Paimon Flamen, which I reviewed and did a playthrough for. This is a trick-taking set collection game with stunning, gorgeous art and okay gameplay. If you watch my Honshu review, you'll know that I'm not crazy about trick-taking. It's okay, and this was very much a trick-taking style game. I had it around for a while. I probably played it 4 or 5 times. It was decent, but I decided to move it on. Now we have Star Realms. This is another game kind of like Rosenkönig that is way better on the iOS because it just kind of plays, it just takes care of all those things for you. This is a 2-player only deck building game of just kind of trying to deplete your points. You're trying to attack your opponent until they run out of health points. It's got some really cool combos. It's a fun game, but it's just way better on the iOS versus playing it in person. So I got rid of that one. Next up is The Climbers. This is also a wooden block style game. In this one, you have a little climber though, and you're trying to get to the top of the tower, and every single turn you move a block higher on this tower. So it kind of starts out kind of wide, and at the end of the game, it's going to be this big spindly thing, and whoever gets highest wins the game. I played it a couple times, and I was very excited about this game. It was a grail game for me for years. I really wanted to try this. I heard so many good things about it. I finally found it for $60, which seemed like a good price. And then I played it a couple times, and I was not terribly blown away. Like, the first time I played it, I was like, cool, yeah. And the second time I played it, I was like, oh, okay. And the third time I played it, I was like, oh, it kind of felt pretty samey. And you have all these cool ladders that you can play, but they're one-time use. And I just feel like there maybe was a better game in there based off of the components than the rules that were actually shipped. So yeah, I decided to get rid of that one. It just didn't appeal to me as much as I wanted it to. Now we have Valley of the Kings. This was a deck builder that I've had for quite a while. It was one of my early reviews, actually, and I enjoyed it. It was okay. It had a neat mechanism of actually sequestering cards into a tomb, and that those would be the ones that score you points in a set collection style. It was quite interactive when it comes to a deck builder where you can really affect your opponents by playing different cards. It was neat, but it just never saw play, so I decided to get rid of it. And the last one is Worm Up, but, oh, I didn't actually get rid of this one. It was on the pile, and then at the very last minute, I decided to save it. It's a kooky little game of moving these little worms across the table. Everybody bids on a specific movement amount. If you reveal the same number of movement as somebody else, then you both don't go, and you're trying to make it to a goalpost first, but the goalpost can move. It's a quirky, weird little game that I got for free at BGGCon a couple years ago, and it was on the to-go pile, but I ended up grabbing it back, so disregard that. Worm Up did not go away. I decided to keep that one around. And with that, it's time to wrap up this vlog. I've talked about a ton of games over the last hour or two, and I think I will have a lot to say in next month's vlog as well. I can already tell you that I'll be acquiring several more games in April than I did in March because I've already acquired them. I'm filming this pretty darn late. That power outage, as well as a little bit of a cold last month where I actually lost an entire week of filming that I wanted to do because I was just coughing like crazy, kind of set me back. I'm trying to get back on track. Hopefully next month I'll get the vlog out much closer to the beginning of the month, and I'm sure I will have a whole bunch of stuff to say. Again, if you have any questions you'd like me to answer in the question and answer section, please shoot those over to me at JonGetsGames@gmail.com. And I think that it pretty much wraps this thing up. As always, I'd like to thank everybody who has been supporting this channel through Patreon, including all of these producer level pledges. If you too would like to directly support everything I do here, you can do so at patreon.com/JonGetsGames, and I'd really appreciate it. Also, if you'd like to watch my monthly vlogs like this one, as well as in-depth board game reviews and full game playthroughs, please subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching.